50 Cent just walked into the biggest chess match hip-hop has seen in 20 years, sat down across from Rick Ross, cracked a smile, and flipped the entire board before Rick Ross could even reach for a pawn. 19,000 copies. That is the number. 19,000 copies for a rapper who spent 2 decades screaming that Rick Ross is untouchable, unbreakable, uncatchable, and set in stone. 19,000 copies with a feature list stacked so tall it looked like a Versus lineup. T.I. on the record. Jeezy on the record. Gucci Mane, French Montana, Don Toliver, Kodak Black, The Dream, Leon Thomas, Big X The Plug, and still, the boat could not sail past 19,000. And 50 Cent, sitting in Louisiana with a champagne flute, a screen glowing in the dark, and a smirk carved out of pure schadenfreude, did what 50 Cent has always done best. 50 Cent typed one sentence. One caption. One shot fired straight through the heart of the Maybach music empire, and by morning, the entire internet was standing over the crater. Rewind the tape. Before 19,000 copies. Before the popcorn photo. Before the Airbnb bombshell. Rick Ross wanted a war, and Rick Ross begged for it. Rick Ross climbed onto the Patrick Bet-David podcast, straightened the collar, puffed the chest, and told the world that 50 Cent does not own power, that 50 Cent does not own the masters, that 50 Cent lives inside a 2-bedroom apartment somewhere in the shadows. Rick Ross laughed. Rick Ross grinned into the camera, like a king holding 4 aces. Rick Ross said 50 Cent could scrub the bottom of the Ross yacht. And out there in the audience, in the comments, on the timelines, a whole generation of fans nodded along, because Rick Ross had built the illusion so carefully, so slowly, so patiently, that the illusion felt like fact. But 50 Cent had been quiet. 50 Cent had been watching. 50 Cent had been stacking receipts inside a folder that no one knew existed, and the moment Rick Ross dropped Set in Stone, 50 Cent opened the folder. Set in Stone? The title alone was supposed to be prophecy. Rick Ross went on interview after interview promising that this album would remind the streets who runs the culture. Rick Ross promised heat. Rick Ross promised classics. Rick Ross promised a stone tablet carved with the name of a boss. And when the release day arrived on the 17th of July, Set in Stone landed on Gamma and Maybach Music Group with a feature list that any label executive would have kissed the ring for. 19 tracks. Roughly 14 of those tracks featured someone else. 95% of the album leaned on other artists to carry it across the finish line. And when the first week numbers finally arrived, the finish line had moved further than anyone expected. 19,000 equivalent album units. Of that, only 2,096 were traditional sales. 2,096 actual buyers. 2,096 humans reaching for a wallet. In the streaming era, that number does not just sting. That number screams. And 50 Cent showed up. Not with a diss track. Not with a subliminal caption. 50 Cent showed up with math. 50 Cent posted the screenshot. 50 Cent wrote the 7 words that lit the fuse. I am sorry, it is over. Cannot fake it forever. That was it. That was the whole caption. No adjectives, no exclamation points, no long paragraph explaining the position. 50 Cent understood that when the numbers speak, the caption only needs to whisper. Then 50 Cent went further. 50 Cent posted a photo eating popcorn, like a man watching a movie the audience already knew the ending to. 50 Cent posted about the chart trending. 50 Cent posted about the concert start time in Detroit, and joked that the seats looked emptier than a Wednesday matinee. 50 Cent turned the timeline into a theater, and put Rick Ross on the marquee. And the fans, the culture, the entire hip-hop internet, could not look away. Rick Ross tried to change the game. Rick Ross knew the album numbers were indefensible, so Rick Ross switched the scoreboard. Rick Ross posted a video walking across an estate, palm trees swaying, marble gleaming, and called it a $100 million house. Rick Ross said that this right here, is what real success looks like. Rick Ross said a 1-week number cannot define a career. Rick Ross said longevity is the true metric. Rick Ross said businesses, real estate, catalog, decades of relevance, that is the boss language. And on any other day, against any other rival, that flex would have landed. But this was not any other day, and 50 Cent is not any other rival. 50 Cent looked at the video, looked at the palm trees Rick Ross could not even show, looked at the empty driveway framing, looked at the angle of the camera, and 50 Cent recognized something Rick Ross had not counted on. 50 Cent recognized a listing photo. 50 Cent went to work. 50 Cent claimed the same mansion Rick Ross was flexing was allegedly listed on Airbnb, available to rent by strangers, complete with a check-in date and a check-out date. 50 Cent asked one question, and it was the question that carved the room in half. If the property is really worth $100 million, why would the property be rented to random travelers by the night? That question, one sentence long, dismantled the illusion. Because the flex only works when the flex is exclusive. The flex only works when the audience believes the mansion belongs to Rick Ross the way a crown belongs to a king. But the moment the audience considers that the mansion might belong to a booking calendar instead of a boss, the crown slips. The Airbnb claim, based on the reporting available, has not been publicly confirmed by Rick Ross or by Airbnb. 50 Cent knows that. The internet knows that. But the seed was planted, and the seed did not need to sprout to shake the tree. Then came the airport. Rick Ross was reportedly spotted walking through a terminal, boarding a commercial flight, standing in the same line as everyone else. On its own, that means nothing. Wealthy people fly commercial every day. Warren Buffett flies commercial. Business owners fly commercial. Sensible millionaires fly commercial because private aviation is a burning pile of fuel, maintenance, storage, pilots, landing fees, and depreciation. 50 Cent has said as much in the 50 Cent playbook. In The Perfect Day to Boss Up, 50 Cent explained that flying private is not always the smart move. There is a difference between enjoying money and setting money on fire to prove you have money. But Rick Ross has spent years feeding the timeline private jet photos. Rick Ross has spent years posting from the tarmac. Rick Ross has spent years building the image of a man who never touches a boarding pass. So when the terminal photo hit the timeline, the image cracked. 50 Cent did not need to say a word. The audience already had the caption written. Understand who 50 Cent actually is, because the mythology has been buried under years of memes. 50 Cent is the man who took a diamond-selling debut and turned that debut into vitamin water equity. 50 Cent turned vitamin water equity into a Coca-Cola exit that changed the economics of what a rapper could earn without ever recording another verse. 50 Cent built G-Unit. 50 Cent built SMS. 50 Cent built Sire Spirits. 50 Cent built Bumbu. 50 Cent built Le Chemin du Roi. 50 Cent built Branson Cognac. 50 Cent built a television empire with Power, then with Power Book 2, then with Raising Cannon, then with Force, then with Ghost. 50 Cent bought a mansion in Shreveport, then bought half the neighborhood around the mansion, then announced a film and television studio to bring an entire industry to Louisiana. That is not a rapper. That is a mogul running a diversified holding company that happens to have a microphone in the corner of the office. And 50 Cent did it while everyone else was chasing streams. The genius of 50 Cent is not the trolling. The trolling is the marketing. The genius is the quiet architecture underneath. While Rick Ross was chasing the perception of wealth, 50 Cent was accumulating the mechanics of wealth. Ownership. Equity. Cash flow. Assets that appreciate. Contracts that pay for decades. Distribution rights. Publishing splits. Studio space. real estate and markets that are still climbing. 50 Cent does not have to shout about the money because the money shouts on its own. 50 Cent does not have to prove the numbers because the numbers appear in filings, in television ratings, in bottle counts, in city council announcements. 50 Cent has done the boring work that turns a rapper into a business, and a business into a legacy. And when Rick Ross tried to challenge 50 Cent on the money, Rick Ross walked into a room where 50 Cent had already put the furniture together, hung the pictures, and lit the fireplace. And then 50 Cent dropped the real bomb. Not on Rick Ross. On the culture. 50 Cent walked into an interview, sat down, smiled, and announced that a brand new record is coming featuring 50 Cent, Eminem, and Tupac Shakur. Tupac Shakur. The panel in the studio nearly fell out of the chairs. The hosts asked twice. The hosts asked how. 50 Cent explained that it is not AI. 50 Cent explained that the Tupac estate delivered unreleased vocals. 50 Cent explained that the record is a theme for the Street Fighter movie. And in that moment, 50 Cent stopped being a rapper feuding with a rival and started being the executive who casts legends across timelines. Rick Ross responded with jokes. Rick Ross said Tupac has been resting for 30 years, let the man rest. Rick Ross said Eminem, come on now. Rick Ross said do the Tony Yayo Lloyd Banks remix? But even the joke revealed the gap. Rick Ross was clowning a Street Fighter movie collaboration with two of the biggest names in hip-hop history, and 50 Cent had already delivered it. Rick Ross tried to counter with Shreveport. Rick Ross mocked the concept renderings of the G-Unit film and television studios. Rick Ross laughed at the drawings. Rick Ross asked why the loans were taking so long. Rick Ross said Hollywood does not need another film studio. Rick Ross said Louisiana does not need 50 Cent. But once again, Rick Ross missed the level 50 Cent was operating on. Concept art is not a finished building. Concept art is a roadmap. Concept art is the piece a mayor holds up when the city council votes on tax incentives. Concept art is the piece an investor studies before signing a term sheet. Concept art is the language of institutions, not the language of Instagram. And while Rick Ross was clowning the drawings, 50 Cent was in real meetings with real people at real desks. 50 Cent was doing the unsexy work of infrastructure. 50 Cent was writing the future of a state, and Rick Ross was writing captions. Now let the numbers finish the argument. Set in Stone debuted at number 39 on the Billboard 200. Some reports listed the number even lower at 46, but even at the more generous number, the position told a story Rick Ross did not want told. Rewind through the Rick Ross catalog. Port of Miami, top of the charts. Trilla, top of the charts. Deeper Than Rap, top of the charts. Teflon Don, top of the charts. God Forgives, I Don Not, top of the charts. Mastermind, top of the charts. 10 out of the last 11 solo albums from Rick Ross landed inside the Billboard 200 top 10. Several went to number 1. Even Richer Than I Ever Been, which drifted to number 22 in 2021, felt like a warning sign at the time. But number 39. Number 39 on the same chart. Number 39 after a stacked feature list and a promotional run that touched every microphone on the internet. That is not a fall off. That is a free fall. The streaming era was supposed to protect artists like Rick Ross. Streaming forgives. Streaming pads. Streaming lets an artist with a loyal core turn a small buying audience into an inflated ranking. And even with that padding, Set in Stone came in at 19,000 equivalent album units. Compare that to the numbers 50 Cent was posting in the prime of 50 Cent Get Rich or Die Tryin' sold 872,000 copies in a single week. Not equivalent units. Not streams padded into a number. Actual physical units flying off actual shelves. The Massacre sold 1.1 million copies in the first week. That is the mountain Rick Ross was standing at the base of when Rick Ross first started throwing rocks. And 2 decades later, 50 Cent is looking down from that same mountain, watching Rick Ross explain why 19,000 is a strategic long game. 50 Cent knows a long game. 50 Cent invented the long game. The long game is not an excuse for a soft opening week. The long game is the compounding return on decades of ownership. Then the tour receipts arrived. 50 Cent posted a photo of a Rick Ross concert venue in Detroit, Michigan. 8 o'clock start time. 8:30, and the room was still breathing empty air. Green dots everywhere, indicating seats that had not been purchased. Green dots stretching from the front row all the way to the rafters. Rick Ross and the team had reportedly begun offering buy one get one 50% off deals to move tickets, and even at the discount, the demand was thin. 50 Cent captioned the moment. 50 Cent asked who told Rick Ross that vanishing for years and dropping an album would generate a tour. 50 Cent did the math out loud, the way 50 Cent always does, and the audience laughed, then thought, then agreed. The comments filled with the same conclusion. When the streams are real, the seats are full. When the streams are inflated, the seats are ghosts. And the venue in Detroit was a graveyard. Understand the psychology of 50 Cent here, because this is the part most commentators miss. 50 Cent does not attack Rick Ross when Rick Ross is up. 50 Cent attacks Rick Ross when the numbers do the heavy lifting. That is the strategy. 50 Cent waits. 50 Cent watches. 50 Cent lets Rick Ross build the tower higher and higher, brick by brick, and only when the tower begins to sway does 50 Cent step forward with a single finger and touch the corner. That is why the trolling lands. That is why the memes go viral. That is why one caption from 50 Cent can do more damage than an entire diss album from someone else. 50 Cent understands the timing of a punchline the way a boxer understands the timing of a counterpunch. 50 Cent has been studying comedy, media, virality, and combat for so long that the difference between a joke and a headline no longer exists. Every joke is a headline. Every headline is a business move. Every business move is a chess piece. Rick Ross tried to save face by talking about the long game. Rick Ross said 22,000 the first week, 20,000 the second week, no fall off, that is the long game. Rick Ross said the new flex is no bots. Rick Ross said the industry inflates numbers. Rick Ross said other rappers pay for streams and pretend the streams are organic. And there is truth inside that argument, real truth, because the streaming economy is filthy with bot numbers. But the argument only works if the same rapper can show the receipts on the other side. If Rick Ross has the streams and the tickets, the streams and the merchandise, the streams and the sneakers, the streams and the spirits, then the case makes itself. But if the sneaker line is invisible and the spirits are moving slower than expected, and the tour venues look like a snow globe of empty green dots, then the argument sounds less like strategy and more like translation. 50 Cent asked the question that ended the debate. 50 Cent asked why the same rappers with the massive streaming numbers cannot sell a single sneaker, a single protein shake, a single bottle, a single peptide. 50 Cent asked why the ecosystem outside the music never lights up if the music itself is really doing the numbers claimed. And that is the checkmate. Because success in modern hip-hop is no longer measured only by chart position. Success is measured by the entire ecosystem that a rapper can activate. Music into sneakers. Sneakers into spirits. Spirits into television. Television into real estate. Real estate into infrastructure. Infrastructure into legacy. 50 Cent has run that entire chain, and every link is bolted in place. Bumbu is on shelves. Le Chemin du Roi is at events. Sire Spirits ships around the world. Power runs on stars and streams globally. Raising Cannon is on multiple seasons. Force keeps growing. G-Unit Film and television is negotiating with the state. Every link. Every single link. Meanwhile, Rick Ross has the mansion, and the mansion may or may not have a check-in policy. Rick Ross has a catalog, and the catalog is real, and Rick Ross deserves credit for the catalog. But the catalog is not enough to counter a mogul running 7 verticals at once. There is also the question of loyalty, and 50 Cent raised the question in a way that stung. 50 Cent pointed out that Rick Ross was cut from power projects created by a black woman showrunner, and Rick Ross tried to explain the parting by blaming that black woman. 50 Cent flipped the frame. 50 Cent said, "Be loyal to the black woman the way you are loyal to Eminem." 50 Cent reminded the audience that opportunities are not the same as birthrights. 50 Cent reminded the audience that Rick Ross was given a role, given a check, given a platform, and instead of gratitude, Rick Ross went to interviews and pointed a finger at the person who signed the check. That was the moment the culture noticed something. That was the moment even neutral fans started scrolling with a raised eyebrow. Because in a beef, ownership matters, but so does character, and character is the receipt no accountant can print. 50 Cent has become something bigger than a rapper. 50 Cent has become a folk hero for anyone who has ever been counted out. 50 Cent was shot 9 times, and 50 Cent turned that story into a movie. 50 Cent was dropped from a label, and 50 Cent turned that dropping into a bidding war between Eminem and Dr. Dre. 50 Cent was written off after G-Unit fractured, and 50 Cent turned the fracture into a television empire. 50 Cent was called finished after the vitamin water exit, and 50 Cent doubled the empire again. Every time the story looked like the story was over, 50 Cent wrote a sequel. And now, in 2026, 50 Cent is writing another sequel. This one stars a mogul, a mansion in Louisiana, a film studio rising out of Shreveport, a rum brand on shelves in Costco, a cognac on tables at black tie events, a Street Fighter theme featuring Tupac, and a rival who spent years talking loud and finally ran out of runway. Return for a moment to the Airbnb allegation, because the allegation is a masterclass in modern warfare. The allegation does not need to be proven. The allegation only needs to be plausible. And the moment the allegation entered the conversation, every fan on the timeline began searching. Every fan began screenshotting. Every fan began asking mutuals in Miami if anyone had ever booked the property. Every fan began cross-referencing tax records, LLC filings, and property databases. 50 Cent did not have to lift another finger. 50 Cent had already turned the audience into an investigative unit. And even if the allegation is never confirmed, the damage is already done, because the audience is now permanently trained to ask a question every time Rick Ross flexes a piece of real estate. Whose name is on the deed? Who is paying the taxes? Who books the calendar? 50 Cent installed a filter, and the filter is not going away. Rick Ross tried one more angle. Rick Ross said, 50, who owns your masters? Rick Ross said, I will buy your masters. Rick Ross said, you better shut up before I buy your masters. It was the kind of line that lights up a comment section. It was the kind of line that made fans on both sides scream. But 50 Cent already had the answer. 50 Cent has spent years addressing the masters question, and 50 Cent has moved through that conversation with more transparency than most artists dare. 50 Cent bought back rights. 50 Cent negotiated new deals. 50 Cent built a television empire specifically because television ownership offered a cleaner economic path than the traditional label ecosystem. 50 Cent chose the war 50 Cent could actually win, and 50 Cent has been winning it. Rick Ross owning a Rick Ross catalog is real. 50 Cent owning television, spirits, real estate, film infrastructure, and a media brand is also real. Both can be true. Only one is scalable. Line up the empires side by side. Rick Ross owns a mansion. Rick Ross owns a catalog. Rick Ross owns Wingstop franchises. Rick Ross owns Maybach Music Group. Rick Ross owns a lifestyle brand. All of that is legitimate. All of that took work. All of that deserves respect. Now line up the 50 Cent empire. 50 Cent owns G-Unit Records. 50 Cent owns G-Unit Film and Television. 50 Cent owns G-Unit Studios in Louisiana. 50 Cent owns Sire Spirits, which houses Bumbu Rum, Le Chemin du Roi Champagne, and Branson Cognac. 50 Cent owns significant equity in television properties. 50 Cent owns a growing real estate portfolio in Shreveport. 50 Cent owns publishing splits, sync rights, and back-end participation on multiple shows. The Scoreboard is not close. The Scoreboard is a landslide. And that scoreboard is why the caption, 7 words long, hit like a hammer. I am sorry, it is over. Cannot fake it forever. The culture has a verdict, even if the culture is still debating out loud. The verdict is that 50 Cent has become the archetype every young hustler wants to imitate. The verdict is that 50 Cent has quietly rewritten the definition of what a rapper can be. The verdict is that the 50 Cent playbook, patience, ownership, media leverage, comedy as marketing, silence as weapon, is now studied in green rooms, in barbershops, in podcasts, in boardrooms. Rick Ross helped build the Instagram Flex era, and Rick Ross deserves credit for it. But the Instagram Flex era is ending. The receipts era has arrived. And in the receipts era, 50 Cent is the king. 50 Cent has the deeds. 50 Cent has the contracts. 50 Cent has the shells. 50 Cent has the television slots. 50 Cent has the state deals. And in a beef where receipts decide the outcome, 50 Cent walked in with a briefcase full of paper, while Rick Ross walked in with a phone full of filters. Here is the angle nobody else is covering. Nobody. There is a hidden villain in this story, and the hidden villain is not Rick Ross. The hidden villain is the algorithm era that convinced an entire generation of artists that visibility equals success. That trend equals wealth. That likes equal leverage. Rick Ross fell into a trap that the algorithm laid for every big name in the culture. The trap says, keep posting, keep flexing, keep performing wealth, and the audience will assume the reality. But 50 Cent, somehow, saw the trap early. 50 Cent kept posting, kept flexing, kept performing, but underneath the performance, 50 Cent was building infrastructure that would exist whether the algorithm cooperated or not. 50 Cent understood that the timeline is a stage, but the empire is a warehouse. And warehouses do not care about lengths. Warehouses store product. Product ships. Shipping generates revenue. Revenue funds the next warehouse. Rick Ross performed wealth. 50 Cent produced wealth. That is the difference the algorithm hid from everyone else, and that is why 19,000 copies cracked the illusion like a hammer through drywall. Look at every category outside the music. Sneakers. 50 Cent has G-Unit sneakers rolling out, including a Lloyd Banks branded high top that Rick Ross clowned as a Costco special, but the clowning ignored the point. 50 Cent is putting a former G-Unit member back on a shelf with a real product. Rick Ross has no sneaker. Rick Ross has no shelf. Spirits. 50 Cent has Bumbu on every rooftop bar in Miami. 50 Cent has Le Chemin du Roi at events with black tie dress codes. 50 Cent has Branson Cognac in the hands of celebrities from every genre. Rick Ross is Bel-Air, and Bel-Air is real, and Bel-Air deserves respect, but the ownership structure around Bel-Air has been described as opaque, and the actual take-home for Rick Ross has never been publicly detailed the way the 50 Cent vitamin water exit was. Every category. Legacy locked.